Is AudioBoom's new tool going to raise legal issues for podcasters that use it? And what can you do if another podcast has the same title as yours? Hi, I am Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, and this is the Podcast Lawyer Live, where each Thursday I answer legal questions that I've seen popping up around the web about podcasting and questions that you folks submit to me directly in the comments and other places. And if you have a question, you can drop it right in the comments right here, and I will try to get to it this time. Or if you're watching on replay, reach out, and I will try to cover it in a future episode. But right now, I'll be back right after this quick opener. So, who's here today? Please say hello in the comments. Let me know you're with me, either live or with a hashtag replay or something, and let me know what you are up to. Let's see, we got a couple people watching, and I know there were a couple of people who were really interested in our topic today, one of our topics, I guess you could say. So I'm going to get right into my two topics. First of all, the news today from Pod News and Podcast Business Journal and a few other places says that AudioBoom, which is one of the big podcast hosting platforms, publishers, the articles speak of it differently, but they're basically a hosting provider, and they do some ad sales work for their shows as well. They have launched a new product service within their offerings called PodRip. And what PodRip does is it removes old host-read ads from the back catalog episodes of shows and replaces them with dynamic insertion points for new ads to go in their place. Sounds great. They say that their back catalog represents a little more than half of the consumption of all the podcast episodes that they host. And so they see this as a big opportunity to monetize those again, to make more money from the existing archive of episodes. It sounds great. It sounds really great. In fact, I'm going to read from their, I guess it's sort of their press release. Let's see. Leading global podcast publisher launched AdRip, the new proprietary ad tech tool that allows podcast creators to monetize their back catalog content. Sounds fantastic. Podcasters on their hosting and distribution platform can have this automated removal of live read advertisements, usually that are embedded into the podcast with no need to re-edit or republish. So I guess it's using some AI technology or something like that. And it replaces that with ad breaks that allow new inventory that can be remonetized through their sales channels every time someone listens to your episodes in the future. Again, sounds fantastic. They say their creator network receives more than 91 million downloads per month with back catalog content, episodes that have left the first sales window, making up about half of that, a little more than half. So now a new way to capture more revenue. This is launching right away here in July of 2021, and they are touting how much more revenue it's going to lead to. Now, I have to say, I have some reservations about this. If you are a podcaster who's been doing live read ads in your shows, you need to think hard before you enable this function in AudioBoom. I believe it's an opt-in, maybe even a pay extra for the service kind of a thing. And certainly they're going to take an ad commission and so on. But be thoughtful, be careful about this, because you have to look at what you promised those advertisers that you did host-read ads for the first time around. And this is, by the way, it doesn't have to be just host-read ads. It could be an embedded ad, where you rolled in a pre-canned message or something like that. We need to think very hard about this, because you had a contract with the advertiser who paid you for that host-read ad. It may not have been a very formal contract. It may have been nothing more than an oral contract, but you need to think, and that makes it worse, actually. You need to think hard about, what did that contract say? What was understood between the parties? Because it's possible that sponsor believed that they were getting evergreen advertising in that episode. If I pay whatever I pay to be mentioned in your episode about whatever topic, I expect that people who listen to it later, not just that first month, People who listen to it later are going to hear my ad. That's brand advertising. It's valuable to me. If I paid for that, that may be what I'm expecting. So we have to do what we can to make sure we are addressing those expectations. Now, at the very least, on a going forward basis, we need to fix our ad contracts so that if you're going to do this kind of thing, sorry about that, if you're going to do this kind of thing, your contracts have to allow for it. They have to address the possibility so that we can do this. So we have to articulate, what is the length of the campaign? How many episodes are you advertising in? And now, how long will your ads remain in the episodes after it's published? What if you could do this 3 days later? Well, then the sponsor's definitely not getting their money's worth, right? Well, at least the perception is there. Now, you may think I'm picking on nits here a little bit, and I guess I am. I guess that's what lawyers do. But I'll tell you, I have had clients come to me saying, hey, I made an ad deal for, X dollars per podcast. And that ambiguity about the use of the word podcast became a problem because the sponsor thought the podcast was the whole series. The producer of the show thought it was the individual episode, and they had used imprecise language. This is another situation where that either imprecise language or lack of clarity, lack of even addressing what's covered, creates an ambiguity, leads to a misunderstanding, a failure to meet, for the minds to meet. The meeting of the minds never happens. And that could mean that the whole contract gets unwound. And I don't think we want to be giving people their money back after we've read their ads in our shows. So let's be careful. What about how long those ads are going to stay in place? Get it into your contracts. If you're not using a written contract with your podcast advertisers, you should. If you're using a company like AudioBoom or someone else who's going to sell and place those ads and handle all that, make sure they're addressing this properly so that there isn't a problem later on. It would probably be on them to deal with it later on, but nevertheless, let's take care of these things and get ahead of it. We need to be thoughtful about our contract language. Here's another thing. What happens if you originally did a host-read ad for brand A, and then a year later, this tool allows you to swap out brand A's advertising for a message about their direct competitor, brand B. Now, when somebody sponsors an episode, they are, I think, justified in believing that they helped fund the production of that episode. It wouldn't have happened but for them, right? Or without them. So we have to think about, hey, are we now allowing ourselves to resell that inventory to the direct competitor of the sponsor who paid for that previous ad? I think this is a bit of a concern. I think that if you read a Coke ad in your original episode and then Pepsi is rolling in a month or 6 months or a year later, Coke's going to have a right to be ticked off about it. What about Casper mattresses and then you switch over to Purple, right? This could be an issue, and we got to think about this very carefully. So they would be rightfully ticked off about that. So let's be careful about what we do. I'm not saying this is bad technology. I think it's fantastic technology. I'm impressed with the ability to do this. But let's make sure that we're in the clear before we go getting into and doing this with that technology. Now, if you're watching live, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a note in the comments just to say hello, even if you don't have a new question or if you're waiting for an answer on the next question or whatever, but I would love to hear from you. And in fact, I'd like to invite you to join my private Facebook group called Legit Podcast Pro. This is a group where we are talking about the legal issues. We're talking about what it means to be a professional in the podcasting space. And we're talking about what we can do legally to position ourselves as expert professionals as we go forward in our podcasting. Things like getting your business structures set up, getting your intellectual property strategy set up, getting your crew and your team strategy set up, and of course, how are you going to go about dealing with customers, clients, monetization issues like this AudioBoom, and how are you going to deal with this monetization issue about when you have a right to now resell the inventory in your show to a different buyer. So we're going to be talking about those kinds of things. It sounds like somebody made a comment. Let me just check it out. Justin Powell is here watching. Thank you, Justin. I saw in the group you had expressed your interest in the subject matter. So we're going to move on to the next question. I'm actually going to post I'm actually going to show an excerpt from the post that I saw that got me going on this. This person, I don't remember if it was you, Justin, or somebody else who posted it, but said, purely by happenstance, I stumbled upon a new podcast using the same name as mine in the same genre as mine. We've been at this for almost 2 years, and this new one was just hosted on Anchor at the end of June. Should I be worried? I'm not terribly miffed or anything, but I'm concerned considering the large amounts of work we've put in. A simple Google search of the name would have returned a trove of content, so I'm concerned about the intent. I would say you should be a little miffed, maybe not bent out of shape about it, but you should be concerned, because what can happen is confusion in the marketplace. You've spent some time building a brand around your podcast title, and you want to make sure that when listeners come looking, they find you and not this competitor who may or may not be riding on your coattails. They may have been purely innocent and not known about it, but I suggest there's an obligation, I think, to search and make sure the title you're adopting is free and clear and good to go. Now, is there a legal obligation? Does the law say somewhere you have to search? No, it doesn't. What it does say, though, is that you can be made to change, to stop those kinds of things. We can get restraining orders. We can get damage awards, those kinds of things, even if you don't have a trademark registration. We're going to get into trademarks in a minute. In the comments on this post, there was a wide variety of misinformation. I don't want to say completely wrong, false information, but misguided or just sort of missing the point. A lot of people talking about, well, if you have an LLC, you've got the company name and you can just make them stop. And that is just plain simple not true. You can register the same name for a company in California, Nevada, Wyoming, Oregon, Washington, Nebraska, Texas, Pennsylvania, every state in the country. So you could theoretically have 50 companies with exactly the same name. And Justin says, yes, this was me, and the overwhelming number of responses. So the LLC name for your company isn't going to stop others in other places from adopting the name. And then we get into this intrastate, crossing state, and even international boundaries with something like a podcast, something like a web page, something like anything virtual, and we get into real issues. Now, what we really are talking about is trademarks. I'm going to come back to that again in a second. But another thing that I saw a lot of people saying is, hey, just talk to them, reach out and let them know and ask them to change. I think that's generally good advice, but you've got to be careful about it. You have to know where you stand first. And that's what I'm going to spend the rest of this time talking about. But you have to be careful when you reach out and talk to the other guy, the adversary, because you can dig a hole that you don't want to dig, basically. There is a concept in the law called declaratory judgment, and that is where someone who feels that they are being threatened with a lawsuit dealing with something about, some legal right, and they feel that that's being unjustified, a threat that's unjustified, they can beat you to court. They could race down to the courthouse and ask a judge, hey, tell them they're wrong. Issue a declaration that I'm within my rights. And sometimes that happens. So if you don't want to get into that fighting the battle as the defendant instead of the plaintiff side of things, you want to be really thoughtful about how you approach that. Now, I think a polite contact saying, hey, don't know if you're aware, my show's been around for 2 years. We've been using this title. It is a brand that we have built, and we're going to ask you to stop. We'll give you a little time, maybe even throw a little cash at them to make a change so they can buy a new domain name, whatever. Make it easy for them to say, oh, okay, sorry, didn't know, mea culpa, those kinds of things. I think that's a really good strategy. And sometimes as a lawyer, I help clients with that kind of contact. It's just a little bit of extra oomph when the lawyer is the one on the phone. Hey, I'm a lawyer, I represent so-and-so. Here's the problem. Let's not make a mountain out of this molehill. Let's get it fixed. Here's what I suggest, that kind of thing. So that's one approach. Now, let's talk about where you really stand, because a lot of people in the group, a lot of the responses on the post said things like, well, you can stop them because it's copyright infringement. It's not copyright infringement. Unless they're copying the actual content of your episodes, that's not copyright. What they're using is the name, the title. Now, what is a trademark? This is what we're talking about. It's actually technically a service mark because you're providing an entertainment service. But trademarks and service marks treated the same, and I'm going to use the word trademark for the rest of this. A trademark is a distinctive name or symbol or word or phrase or logo or design or something like that that is used to identify the goods or services of a particular source as coming from that source out in the commercial and interstate commerce. Okay, so when you see a red triangle on a box of crackers here in the United States, we know that's Nabisco. You don't even have to see the word Nabisco to know, oh, that's Triscuit crackers or saltines or Oreo cookies, whatever. They come from Nabisco. We know that. If you use the name Triscuit, another trademark for crackers coming from the company Nabisco, we know. If it's called a Triscuit, it better actually be a Nabisco Triscuit. If you call a cookie an Oreo, it better be Oreo. Otherwise, it's the generic, the store brand, or, what's the generic term for an Oreo cookie? How about cream-filled chocolate wafer cookie? Sandwich cookie, right? So that's what we're sort of dealing with. So if you've chosen a distinctive title for your show, and let's be very clear, it has to be distinctive. My own title is a very good example of a initially non-distinctive title. My podcast is called Entertainment Law Update. It tells you exactly what the show is. It's an update about entertainment law. And so when we started the show, now 12 and a half years ago, we did not have a distinctive title. We couldn't have registered a trademark and claimed trademark protection for that. But because we've been using it for a long time, and I'm saying long time meaning 5 to 10 years, we have been able to acquire distinctiveness. We've achieved a secondary meaning in the mind of our consuming public. They know when they listen to Entertainment Law Update, they're hearing Gordon and my co-host Tamara talk about entertainment law. So that has acquired the distinctiveness. But when you're just starting out, you want to choose something as distinctive as possible. So if you're doing the tennis shoe show and all you do is talk about the greatest thing in tennis shoes, it's probably not going to be registrable. But if you've come up with something really clever and unique and distinctive, that is something you can protect because it identifies your goods and so on. Even if you haven't registered your trademark, all is not lost. And by the way, you should be thinking about registering the trademark. Now, registration is a good idea. Don't get me wrong. It costs a little bit of money. Let's be honest. It could cost $1,000 or more to get a trademark registered if you use a lawyer, those kinds of things. But it is worthwhile because it establishes what the law refers to as prima facie evidence. That is first look evidence of ownership of the trademark, of the brand. That registration, basically you waive that and people take notice. Okay, I better stop. Or okay, we better take it down. And I'll tell you about the remedy in a minute. It provides for quick takedowns with the hosting providers that you might use. When you have the trademark registration, you reach out, you say, hey, here's my registration number. Take that podcast down. It's infringing on my brand. And it gets fast action in the court. It can get us a quick restraining order, those kinds of things, as well as damage awards under the trademark law. It gets you into federal court. Now, even if you haven't registered your trademark, there is a provision in the trademark law called, it's Section 43A of what's called the Lanham Act, and it's codified in the U.S. as Title 15, Section 1125A. And it says that any person who uses in commerce any word, term, name, symbol, or device, or combination of those, or any false designation of origin, false or misleading description of fact, or false or misleading representation of fact, which is likely to cause confusion or mistake or deceive, down at the very bottom, shall be liable in a civil action by any person who believes that he or she is likely to be damaged by such act. So that's the basis. Section 43A, Lanham Act. It's called unfair competition. Whoops, what's going on here? Got the wrong thing showing here. There we go. Section 43A of the Lanham Act is the unfair competition statute, and it did not say it has to be a registered trademark. So it is possible to go into court and say, hey, make them stop. It is harder because you don't have the registered trademark. You have to prove now that it's deceiving as to source or origin and those kinds of things, that the confusion is real, those kinds of things, which are a little harder to prove when you don't own a registered trademark. So I guess what I want to say is, though, all is not lost. There is hope. You have a right to do something. What I want to say very clearly to you, Justin, and anybody else who's in this situation is you can't just do nothing. You have to reach out to them. You have to let them know, hey, we have the superior rights to this, so stop it. If you were there first, you win that part of the argument. Superior rights come from first use in interstate commerce. So if you've published 10 episodes and they've published one, assuming they didn't publish theirs before you published your first, you're in good shape. You're going to be good to go on the trademark and unfair competition kinds of claims. Now, should you do this outreach yourself? Well, if you want to try it, I mean, I have one client where, unfortunately, she has a title for her show. Excuse me, she has a title for her show that is, it's very popular. Let's put it that way. Lots of people keep choosing very similar title, and they don't search. They just don't bother to look. And so we end up sending lots and lots of warnings and notices and demands to take it down and so on. And I'm going to get to your question in just a second. Anyway, what we do is we reach out to them, and she usually makes the first contact, tracks down an email address, sends them an email, hey, this is the situation. And I would say 9 times out of 10, they say, oh, I'm so sorry, I'll change it. Would this be okay? Or something like that. It's usually a pretty congenial conversation, and then it takes them a few weeks to make the change, and everything works out okay. She's policing her trademark. She's staying on top of it. And that is, she has a registered trademark, but it is important to stay on top of these things, because if you don't act on your rights, you do eventually lose them. So Justin's asking, if I can't find a way to reach them, is reaching out to Anchor good enough? That's certainly, it is okay. Anchor, if Anchor is the host, I know from personal experience from this particular client I was telling you about, you can contact Anchor, and through their privacy policy or terms of service page, they have a link to their complaint form, and you can file a complaint and say, I own the trademark, I own the brand for this title. You don't own a registered trademark, but you do have rights by virtue of that 2 years of prior use. I don't know how they'll respond to that. What I know is when you have a registration number, they take it seriously and they take down the episode. So you do need to be pretty clear about how you approach it. What I'll tell you, though, is that if you can look at the RSS feed for their show, oftentimes in the metadata, so you're going to open the view source window in your Chrome browser or something like that, oftentimes the email address for the show or the hosts is embedded in that metadata for the RSS feed. So that's a good way to try to reach out to them. But do your searching, try to figure it out. I always like to ask them first, so that they're not just getting taken down and getting a rude notice from their hosting provider, because if they can make the change over time and let their audience know, hey, we're changing our title, that's easier on everybody. And, it's being a good human being. But if there's no way, reach out to Anchor. Reach out to Spotify. Same thing. Anchor's owned by Spotify now, but it makes sense to reach out to both. And you can do the same process with the other platforms. But Anchor is the host. So if they stop hosting the show, those episodes are going to go away on the other platforms pretty quickly. So that would be how I would recommend approaching it, is start by trying to reach out to them directly, personally. Maybe even find out their Instagram and send them a direct message on Instagram. Hey, I've got something I need to talk to you about. Can I get your email address? Can we reach out this way? Can we connect? Those kinds of things. Good way to approach it. Be a good human being. Don't be don't be a jerk about it. And do give a careful evaluation of whether your title really is as distinctive as we hope it is. And is there some weakness? You can always reach out and talk to a lawyer. I think it's a good idea. And it doesn't have to be colossally expensive, although you're spending hundreds of dollars rather than tens of dollars probably. But I think it's a really good idea. And that's it. I don't think anybody else is watching live right now, but Justin, if you've got any other questions, now's the time. I'm going to hang out for another, 20 or 30 seconds, and then I'm going to call it a day for this episode of the Podcast Lawyer Live. And I will once again invite you to join me in the Legit Podcast Pro group. Go on over to legitpodcastpro.com, and I'll get your email address so I can reach you in case something goes wrong with the group or with whatever. And then join the group here on Facebook, Legit Podcast Pro. I'd love to have you, and it'd be great to see you. And since I don't see it, Justin says, thank you. Well, thank you for a great question. I'm glad I got to it today, and I'm glad I was able to dispel some of the misinformation, and I hope I've clarified things for you a little bit. And good luck. I wish you the best getting this cleared up. Hopefully it won't be too much of a hassle. And I'm here if you've got other questions in the future. So again, thank you for watching. If you're watching on replay, thanks for being here. Give me a hashtag replay so I know you watched. And tune in next Thursday at 4 p.m. Pacific time when I come back with another episode of the Podcast Lawyer Live. Have a great day. I forgot. I forgot to tell you, I'm going to be speaking at Podcast Movement live in person on a panel about music law next 2 weeks away on the 6th of September. I think it's 5th or 6th of August, excuse me. And earlier today, I recorded a joint session with my colleague David Oxenford, who he and I talked about some of the legal basics. And so if you're getting the virtual ticket, if you're attending Podcast Movement, either live or virtually, be sure you check that out, and we'll look forward to seeing you again really soon. Okay, now I'm done. See you next time. Bye.